Hello and welcome to the first video in a series on Chrome Developer Tools. Today we will mostly be focusing on the Inspect tab. That's the first tab that you see when you open Chrome Developer Tools. Okay, so what I have is a very simple page setup here. This is just a basic layout. One thing that I'm going to be using is this is Visual Studio Code using a plugin called Live Server. So you can access that by typing in live server and then installing. I already have it installed, so I don't need to do anything. So if we come back to our page, there should be a go live button, and that's what we'll be using. So it automatically starts up a server for you, and this is really good for static web pages. Another thing it does is it has what's called hot reload. So every time you make a change, it'll just automatically update and reload the browser for you. So we will be using that. Using Chrome Developer Tools, there's several ways you can get it to open. One way is to just right click anywhere, or usually on the element that you're targeting, and then inspect. And normally the first thing I do is undock the item, so we can undock it into a separate window. That's usually the most handy way. But since we're in full screen mode here, I'm going to put it back underneath. So there's a couple more ways. You can go to the view menu and then developer, and then if you click on developer tools or JavaScript console, both of those will open the same thing. The console is just going to open it in the second tab right here. Another way to open this is to use a shortcut on the Mac. It's Command-Option-J. That will open up the developer tools also. So as we come in here, it's going to have the full source code inside of the Elements tab. So everything inside, like the head tag that you don't see, that'll also be available. So we can click and open this in a brand new tab to see the raw version of the style sheet. But most times you'll be interacting with it using the sidebar over here on the right. That's usually the easiest way. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to make a change to the CSS because this is a problem that a lot of people run into. So I'm going to change the width of this sidebar from 15% to 25%. Notice that this is defined twice, but the last item is going to win. And what happens a lot of times is you'll have a right sidebar, it'll fall off the end of the row. And that's because a lot of times the width can only add up to 100%, but what people don't take into account are things like margins. So that also has to include the margins. So if we were to right click in here, it will take us straight to our element right here. So we can see that we have width defined at 25%. And if it's defined twice, then whichever loads last is going to win. So we can interact with this, and a lot of times this is a better workflow than going to your CSS file, saving the file, hitting reload in the browser. If you can just work with it live and see it live, it's usually much faster. And then once you settle on a certain value, then you can update your style sheet. So a lot of times it's a lot quicker. So in here we can just go back and type in a value, and it'll just update. And a lot of times if we don't know the actual value, we can always hit the up and down arrow. So hitting up and down, it's going to increase it 1% at a time. Another thing you could do is hit the shift. So shift up is going to change it by 10. So notice in here we're working with percents. It'll also do the same thing with pixels. So if I have this height property, I can just hit up and down arrow, shift up and down, the same way as if I was working with percents. So next thing that we'll go over are the different states. So one thing that you're going to run into occasionally is you notice that there's no underlining unless you hover over the item. And then if you right click and go, it'll take you straight to this link inside the nav bar. But notice that you lose, as soon as you right click and come down into the developer tool section, you lose the hover state. So one way to preserve this is that you can come in here. So this section right here, it'll force the element state. So if we click on hover, notice up here we get the hover effect with our item underlined. And then we can see the styles that are actually being applied. So since we have the hover state is going to override the state that's not the hover state. So that's going to be strike through inside the in the styles tab over here. So if we were to toggle that off, then this style would apply again. And then we could do the same thing for visited. So if the link has been visited before, there's a style here to color it white, and which that does. And we can do the same thing with focus. So we have just a simple email input form down here. So notice that when we're focused on the element, the text converts to orange. And then if we were to inspect the element, we're going to lose that state. So we have to toggle it on in here also. And there's several other states, including active, that the same approach will work. Okay, so the next thing that we'll go over, so for our font size, we're using a relative unit of measure. And for this paragraph right here, we have the font size set at the root pseudo element to 1 rem. And then the browser is applying its own style sheet. Since we haven't defined any specific properties regarding the margin for each paragraph, we also aren't using CSS Reset. So CSS Reset is basically CSS that a lot of websites use to undo the default CSS because they don't want that state. But so we're getting some margin top and bottom. And then if we come down here, we can see that 16 pixels is the equivalent of 1 EM. 1 REM, that's going to be based on the root font size. So that should also be computing to 16 pixels. So we can go to the computed tab, and then that will tell us the exact size that the page is showing. So styles are based on what we have written in our CSS code basically, and based on what the user agent style sheet is. Computed is actually what's being shown. The reason why that this is important is that when we're using relative units of measure, for accessibility reasons, the user can have their browser set to large and extra large text. The computed size can be different depending on the browser settings or the device that's being used. The root font size by default in Chrome is 16 pixels. So let's just actually change this. We change this to 0.875 rem. And then if we were to come back in here, our font size just went from 16 pixels to 14 pixels. And then since we changed this, 1M is also going to be that exact same size, the margin top and bottom. That was 16 pixels before. So that's based on the font size of the parent element. And one final thing to note, that as we click on different elements, the whole tree is being outlined down here at this bottom row. So we can go back to selecting the paragraph, the article, and then so we have a wrapper, which is a div that's basically a container for everything else that's on the page. So we can click through here. This will give us the location of a single element within the document tree. This has been a breakdown of using Chrome Developer Tools, particularly the Elements tab. And in future videos, we're going to go over all the different tabs within Chrome Developer Tools to see what they do and how they work and how they can be used to fix errors and optimize performance within your application. Thank you for watching.